Imagine a ruler so powerful that his every breath was believed to uphold the balance of the universe. Now imagine that same ruler living in a palace of gold, surrounded by sycophants and sacred animals, all while being haunted by dreams of death and eternity. Welcome to the disturbing life of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Hello there, and welcome to this special Boring History for Sleep episode, where we gently unravel the hidden, often unsettling truths of history's most iconic figures. Tonight, we're diving into the surreal world of the god-kings of the Nile. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're listening from the heart of a bustling city or a quiet, sleepy town, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you enjoy this type of soothing, informative content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these calming explorations coming. Now, let's ease into our story. Picture it. Golden sands stretching endlessly beneath a cloudless azure sky. Along the fertile ribbon of the Nile, grand temples tower, and pyramids pierce the heavens. This is ancient Egypt, one of the oldest and most enduring civilizations in human history. Spanning more than 3,000 years, it gave the world some of its most breathtaking art, architecture, and cultural wonders. At the heart of this empire stood the pharaohs, not merely kings, but divine beings on earth. The living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, and upon their death, united with Osiris, god of the afterlife. They wielded absolute power over the state, religion, and military, and were revered not just as rulers, but as walking gods. Yet beneath the gold and grandeur lay something far more complicated. Their rule, while supreme, was also suffocating. They were bound to a lifestyle dictated by divine expectation, sacred law, and cosmic symbolism. Every step, gesture, and word of a pharaoh could have metaphysical consequences. The role of a pharaoh was a paradox. On the one hand, he was the most powerful man in the land, his word law, his command unchallenged. On the other, he was trapped in a role that demanded perfection, ritual perfection, moral perfection, divine perfection. It was less a life of freedom and more a performance in an eternal sacred drama. This burden was not borne lightly. From the moment of coronation, a pharaoh stepped out of the realm of mortals and into the sphere of the divine. His body, voice, and actions became instruments of the gods. His breath sustained Ma'at, the sacred balance of the cosmos. A lapse in judgment or ritual could bring drought, plague, or war. The weight of the universe sat on the shoulders of these golden men. Consider the setting in which these rulers lived. The palaces were not merely royal homes, they were ceremonial stages. Imagine gleaming marble halls cooled by lotus-filled fountains, with corridors lined with murals of divine triumph. Walls whispered secrets in hieroglyphs, and every object, from the pharaoh's sandals to the throne itself, was charged with religious symbolism. Pharaohs were rarely alone. Surrounded by scribes, advisors, priests, and servants, their lives were a constant choreography. Each moment held significance. Even their dreams were interpreted for divine guidance. Sleep was not merely rest, it was communion with the gods, and always the presence of death hovered close. Unlike modern rulers whose legacies are defined by policies and politics, a pharaoh's ultimate success was judged by how well he prepared for the afterlife. In a world where eternity was the prize, life became a prelude. Every action, decision, and construction served one goal: immortality. Their tombs were not graves but gateways, intricately engineered spiritual vessels meant to propel them through the underworld and into eternal paradise. They believed they would live again, not in spirit alone, but as powerful, resurrected beings, ruling once more in a mirror realm of divine harmony. This is why their stories matter. Because in their pursuit of eternal life, the pharaohs left behind clues, in stone, gold, and legend, that still whisper across millennia. They force us to consider the lengths we go to leave a mark, the stories we tell to comfort ourselves in the face of death. Over the next few sections, we'll explore the daily routines of the pharaohs, their lavish yet suffocating royal court, the tangled family politics that often involved incest and betrayal, and the chilling lengths to which they would go to ensure their legacy lasted forever. We'll meet some of history's most fascinating figures: Hatshepsut, the queen who ruled as king; Akhenaten, the heretic Pharaoh who tried to rewrite Egypt's religion, and Ramses II, a ruler so mighty he was believed to be the inspiration for the biblical Pharaoh of Exodus. But this isn't just a tale of rulers, it's a meditation on power, divinity, fear, and the endless human quest to defy death. So dim the lights, settle in, and let your mind drift back across the millennia. You are about to walk in the shadow of kings, through candle-lit corridors filled with incense, past towering columns carved with the secrets of the cosmos, and into the hearts and minds of men who were treated as gods, but burdened with very human fears. This is the story of the disturbing life of the Pharaohs. Let's begin. The sun rises over the ancient city of Thebes. A warm golden light washes over the limestone walls of the royal palace, and with it, the day of a god on earth begins. It is not merely morning in Egypt, it is the start of another performance in the eternal ritual that sustains the universe. Inside the palace, silence reigns. The air is still, perfumed by incense burning from the previous night's offerings. Then, the first sounds. Soft footsteps of barefoot servants entering the sacred bedchamber. They move like whispers, as if disturbing the king too suddenly might throw the cosmos into disarray. The pharaoh's day starts not with casual yawns, but with sacred cleansing. He is led to a pool of holy water, flanked by priests who chant protective hymns. The water is not just to bathe, it is to purify. It washes away any spiritual impurity that may have clung to him during the vulnerable hours of sleep. His body, shaven of all hair to prevent lice and maintain ritual cleanliness, is anointed with rare oils, frankincense for holiness, myrrh for protection, lotus for rebirth. His face is painted with black coal around the eyes, not just for beauty, but to reflect the eye of Horus and protect from the scorching glare of Ra. Every act of grooming is layered with religious symbolism. The pharaoh is not dressing for style or status. He is being transformed into a vessel of divine order. Once fully adorned in gleaming linens, bejeweled collars, and the sacred crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the pharaoh is no longer just a man, he is Horus incarnate. His first task is spiritual. He walks in full regalia, through echoing halls to the temple's inner sanctum. Only he and the highest priests may enter this holy space, where the statue of the god Amun or Ra awaits in stillness. The pharaoh burns incense, offers bread, pours wine, and speaks sacred phrases passed down for generations. These rituals are not optional. The pharaoh's faithfulness ensures the Nile will flood, the crops will grow, and the sun will rise again tomorrow. After divine duties come earthly ones. Seated on a golden throne surrounded by lotus columns, the pharaoh holds court. Scribes read petitions from far corners of the land, border disputes, tax records, omens seen in the stars. He listens, questions, and delivers verdicts. Though the vizier and officials execute the logistics of empire, the pharaoh's word is final. These sessions are long, punctuated by ceremonies of allegiance. Ambassadors arrive with exotic gifts, ivory from Punt, cedarwood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan. Each visitor bows deeply, eyes averted, addressing not a man, but a god. The pharaoh may then tour ongoing building projects, grand temples, obelisks, statues of himself towering above the people. He inspects them not as mere construction sites, but as sanctuaries of eternity being forged from stone. Every slab laid is an echo of his divine will. Lunch is taken in the shade of a colonnade. Delicacies of roasted duck, honey cakes, pomegranates, and date wine are served. Musicians play the harp. Dancers move in slow rhythm. The pharaoh eats little. His presence, not his appetite, is what nourishes the court. In the afternoon, he may retreat to private chambers or a quiet garden with sacred animals. Baboons trained to dance, lions kept as companions. Here, he discusses theology or the movement of stars with high priests. Even leisure is sacred. Even rest is ritual. Some days include a ceremonial hunt. The pharaoh rides out in a chariot drawn by white stallions, bow in hand, flanked by guards. He aims not merely to slay beasts, but to conquer chaos. Every lion or antelope symbolizing disorder vanquished by divine order. The kill is a sacred triumph. On days of festival, he becomes the centerpiece of grand public processions. Crowds gather by the thousands to see him pass, a shimmering figure beneath a gilded canopy, perfumed by clouds of incense, flanked by priests, musicians, and sacred relics. Flowers are tossed, chants rise like waves, and drums beat like the pulse of the universe. As the sun begins to lower, his responsibilities shift once again to the spiritual. The west, where the sun sets, symbolizes death and the underworld. The pharaoh must oversee evening rites to ensure Ra's safe passage through the night sky. Statues are veiled, prayers intoned, and sacred lamps lit to guide the sun god through the darkness. Dinner, when taken, is quieter. The court dines in a ceremonial hall. More than a meal, it is a sacred event. The pharaoh presides at the head of the table, a living embodiment of divine order. Every gesture, every word, every toast is imbued with meaning. Finally, when the stars glimmer above the desert and the city sleeps, the pharaoh retires. But his rest is far from ordinary. Dreams are not his own. They are messages from the gods. Specialist priests known as dream interpreters keep vigil nearby, ready to decipher the cryptic symbols of the night. A serpent in a dream might mean betrayal, a rising sun, rebirth, a child, the coming of a new god. If the dreams are troubling, protective spells are recited. Amulets are placed under pillows. Headrests are carved with divine faces to shield the mind from demonic intrusions. Even in slumber, the pharaoh is never alone, and so the day ends, as sacred as it began. For the pharaoh, there is no true privacy, no moment without meaning. He is a bridge between mortals and gods, living in a world where the boundary between spirit and flesh blurs. Every act sustains the world. Every failure could unravel it. This is not a life of leisure, though it gleams with luxury. It is a relentless performance on the stage of eternity. One man, burdened with cosmic duty, worshipped and watched by millions, ruling not just a land, but the very rhythm of the universe itself. Such was the day in the life of a pharaoh. Behind the grand facades of temples and the solemnity of royal rituals lay a world no less complex, no less dangerous. The inner sanctum of the pharaoh's palace, where power was not always overt and danger wore the face of family. The royal court of ancient Egypt, opulent and sacred, was also a seething crucible of ambition, rivalry, and deception. From the day a pharaoh took the throne, his most pressing concern, aside from communing with gods and maintaining Ma'at, was securing an heir. But in a world where divine bloodlines mattered more than anything, this task was both sacred and perilous. The pharaoh's primary wife, known as the Great Royal Wife, often doubled as his sister or half-sister. The ancient Egyptians believed that the royal bloodline should remain as pure as the gods they descended from. Incest was not just accepted, it was encouraged. This, they reasoned, emulated the divine union of Isis and Osiris, siblings and lovers. But the very practice that bound the royal house in divinity also sowed seeds of tragedy, mental illness, and deadly competition. The palace itself, vast and fragrant with myrrh and sandalwood, teemed with wives, concubines, servants, and spies. It was a golden prison, especially for royal women. Each wife, each son, was a potential pawn or player in the high-stakes game of succession. While the great royal wife held ceremonial power, many secondary wives came from powerful noble families or were gifted by foreign rulers, and each brought her own ambitions. These women lived in the harem, a secluded yet politically charged wing of the palace. It was here that schemes were whispered in the shade of fig trees, where alliances formed over cups of sweet wine, and where enemies met their end behind closed doors. Court gossip was more than idle talk. It was intelligence. Rumors could elevate a prince or doom a queen. One concubine's rise could mean another's disappearance. A poorly timed pregnancy could change the fate of an entire dynasty. Consider the infamous rivalry between Queen Nefertari and Isetnefret, wives of Ramses II. Nefertari was the more famous, immortalized in the lavish temple at Abu Simbel, her beauty and intelligence celebrated in sculpture and poem. But Isetnefret, though less visible in history's spotlight, maneuvered carefully to secure her son Merneptah's place on the throne. The competition between these queens was quiet, deadly, and ultimately decisive. Then there was Hatshepsut, daughter of a king, wife of a king, and eventually king herself. When her husband died, she initially served as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III. But soon she assumed full kingship, donning the traditional false beard and male regalia. Her reign, one of prosperity and cultural flourishing, was an unprecedented assertion of female power in a world ruled by men. Yet after her death, Thutmose III systematically erased her from monuments, striking her name from history. A ghost battle of egos played out on temple walls. Equally shocking was the reign of Akhenaten, the heretic king who discarded Egypt's pantheon for a single sun god, Aten. His court was a volatile mix of religious zealots, disgruntled priests, and confused nobles. Even his queen, the legendary Nefertiti, vanished mysteriously from the records during his radical reforms. Some scholars speculate she may have ruled as a pharaoh under a different name. Others suspect palace intrigue and quiet elimination. Within these walls, royal children were both symbols and weapons. Sons vied for their father's favor. Daughters were married off to seal alliances, or in some tragic cases, to their own brothers or fathers. Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb dazzled the modern world, was the product of such a union between siblings. His frail body, riddled with congenital defects, whispered of the genetic cost of preserving divine blood. But the real danger lay in the shadows, eunuchs, stewards, chamberlains, and scribes who saw everything and said little. Many were born into roles of silence, yet wielded enormous influence. A well-timed word in the pharaoh's ear, a falsified document, a manipulated dream interpretation, all could change the balance of power overnight. One of the most brutal tales of palace intrigue comes from the reign of Ramses III. Late in his rule, a conspiracy led by one of his secondary wives, Tia, and her son Pentaur, sought to assassinate him. The plot was uncovered, but not before the king was grievously wounded, likely fatally. The conspirators were tried and forced to commit suicide. Some were buried alive. The papyrus records of this trial read like a courtroom drama filled with betrayal, seduction, and blood. Power plays were not always violent, but they were always strategic. Royal women often commissioned temples and chapels in their own names to build prestige. They cultivated networks among priests, scribes, and military officers. A queen who commanded loyalty from the temple of Amun could rival the influence of the pharaoh himself. Even the act of childbirth carried political weight. A son born under auspicious stars or prophesied by oracles might suddenly leapfrog older siblings in the line of succession. Midwives, astrologers, and wet nurses became essential and dangerous members of the palace ecosystem. The whisper of a divine dream, interpreted conveniently, could rewrite a prince's destiny overnight. And yet, for all the cutthroat politics, the Egyptian court was steeped in ceremonial pageantry. On festival days, royal families paraded through Thebes, resplendent in gold, smiling for the adoring crowds. They appeared united, divine, inviolable. But behind the veil of incense and fanfare, the knives were always being sharpened. Even in death, the drama didn't end. Tombs were desecrated, names were chiseled out, mummies burned or hidden. A defeated rival's memory could be erased from history, a fate worse than death in the Egyptian belief system. To be forgotten was to truly die. In this world of divine kingship and mortal frailty, where gods slept with queens and brothers turned on brothers, the pharaoh's palace was both paradise and prison, a gilded cage where love, loyalty, ambition, and betrayal danced in endless rhythm beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. Such was the royal court of Egypt, a place where power was sacred but never safe. To understand ancient Egypt, one must first understand this. It was a civilization obsessed with death, or more precisely, with what came after it. For the pharaohs, death was not an end, but a doorway. And through that doorway, they believed, lay eternal life. But only if every rite, every symbol, and every preparation had been perfectly executed. In the world of the Nile, life was short, unpredictable, and harsh. Famine, disease, and war were constant companions. Yet, paradoxically, their worldview was one of profound optimism, not for this life, but for the next. The tomb was not a grave, it was a launch pad, and for the pharaoh, who was believed to become one with Osiris upon death, it was the most sacred project of all. Construction of a tomb began almost as soon as a pharaoh took the throne. For some, like Seti I, this meant 2 decades of preparation. For others, like the short-reigned Tutankhamun, death came too quickly, and a smaller tomb had to be adapted in haste. But regardless of the size, the purpose was the same: to preserve the body, house the soul, and guide the spirit through the perilous journey of the afterlife. Tombs were not simply decorated, they were encoded with magic. Walls were painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, and the Book of Gates. Spiritual roadmaps filled with spells, passwords, and invocations to survive the underworld's trials. The deceased pharaoh had to face serpents, fire lakes, and gods who would weigh his heart against the feather of Maat. If his heart was heavier, weighed down by sin or dishonesty, it would be devoured by Ammit, the soul-eating beast. To prevent such a fate, everything had to be perfect. The body underwent mummification, a 70-day ritual of drying, anointing, and wrapping. Organs were removed and placed in canopic jars guarded by protective deities. The face was masked in gold, and amulets were inserted between the layers of linen, each one charged with specific protections. But a king could not journey alone. In the earliest dynasties, real people were buried with their pharaoh: wives, servants, guards, even musicians. This was known as retainer sacrifice, and it was not symbolic. These individuals were drugged, strangled, or killed by blade to accompany their master into eternity. At the tomb of King Jer, over 300 such sacrifices have been discovered. Over time, as beliefs evolved and perhaps as morality intervened, these practices were replaced by shabtis, small figurines inscribed with spells that would magically perform labor for the king in the afterlife. But the sentiment remained the same. A pharaoh must never face eternity alone. Tombs were stocked like luxury apartments. There were food jars, furniture, weapons, board games, perfumes, and clothing. Everything the king might need, from sandals to scepters, was carefully placed with him. Inscriptions and statues ensured these objects would become usable in the afterlife. And then, the ceiling. The burial chamber, once filled, was sealed shut and hidden behind false walls, cursed passages, and complex traps. Tomb robbing was a constant threat, and curses were engraved not merely to scare intruders but to channel divine retribution. Some passages warn of blindness, disease, or death to anyone who dared disturb the sacred rest. Yet many tombs were robbed, often within years of burial. Even priests and royal officials were sometimes complicit. The treasures were too tempting, the belief in magic too uncertain. Still, some survived. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922, revealed what had once been the standard: a chamber overflowing with gold, alabaster, inlaid wood, and mystery. The boy king, barely a footnote in history, became its most iconic figure because his tomb, almost uniquely, remained mostly untouched. What it revealed was not just opulence, but devotion. Every artifact, every hieroglyph, was part of a system designed to ensure eternal harmony. The afterlife, in Egyptian belief, was not static. It was an active realm: fields to farm, temples to visit, gods to appease. The pharaoh needed his court, his tools, and his identity intact to function within it. This obsession with death shaped Egypt's landscape. Entire cities, like the necropolis at Thebes, were built around the needs of the dead. Workers' villages like Deir el-Medina were home to generations of artisans who toiled in secrecy, carving tombs that only the dead would see. Their work was backbreaking, but revered. Their lives were governed by strict routine and secrecy. Tomb layouts, symbol systems, and architectural designs were state secrets. A breach of confidentiality could lead to exile or execution. Yet within this guarded world, artisans left traces of their humanity. Jokes etched into the walls, prayers for their own safe passage, or graffiti declaring, "I was here." Priests, too, played a key role beyond the burial. The funerary cult of the pharaoh continued long after interment. Temples were erected near tombs where rituals and offerings were performed regularly to sustain the king's soul. These were not one-time events, but duties that could last centuries. Generations of priests were charged with reciting sacred texts, preparing feasts, and keeping the flame of royal immortality alive. Even common Egyptians contributed. During festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, families would sail to the West Bank to visit tombs, offering flowers and food, believing their reverence strengthened the bond between the living and the dead. In doing so, they renewed the pharaoh's cosmic role and ensured their own spiritual well-being. All this points to a society where the line between the living and the dead was fluid. Death was not feared in the modern sense. It was integrated, expected, and prepared for with reverence. The pharaoh stood at the center of this worldview, both a bridge and a beacon. And so, with every block of limestone hauled, every prayer uttered, and every gold inlay carved, the ancient Egyptians weren't merely honoring their king. They were crafting a cosmic anchor, a guarantee that the sun would rise, that the river would flood, and that the world, upheld by Ma'at, would continue. For in Egypt, a pharaoh's tomb was not his end. It was where his real reign began. In ancient Egypt, stone did not merely build, it spoke. It spoke of gods, eternity, and divine order. Every temple, obelisk, and colossus was more than a structure. It was a sacred mechanism designed to bridge heaven and earth, to honor the gods, and to remind the living of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. But for the pharaoh, architecture was not just a legacy, it was a sacred obligation. Let us begin with the temples, not places of worship in the modern sense, but cosmic engines. The most prominent, like Karnak and Luxor, were not built in a generation. They evolved, stone by stone, ruler by ruler, across centuries. Each new pharaoh added to the legacy, expanding courtyards, raising obelisks, and engraving his name deeper into history. The temple layout followed a precise spiritual blueprint. At the outer gates stood pylons, monumental towers symbolizing the horizon, where the sun god Ra rose and fell each day. Passing through them was an act of spiritual transition. Visitors, mostly priests and elite officials, moved through halls of increasingly restricted access, from public courts to sacred sanctuaries. At the heart, deep in shadow and silence, stood the inner sanctum, the naos, which housed the statue of the god. Only the high priest and the pharaoh himself could enter this space. These temples were literal reflections of the cosmos. Columns resembled bundles of papyrus or lotus, plants of creation. Ceilings were painted with stars, creating an inverted sky. Every inch bore symbolism: falcons for Horus, ankhs for life, scarabs for transformation, cobras for protection. To walk through a temple was to walk through a cosmic narrative, where stone was scripture, but these weren't quiet places. At dawn, the priests woke the statue of the god with hymns, incense, and sacred oils. They offered food and drink, not consumed physically but spiritually, and performed rituals to sustain the divine presence. Each act mirrored the pharaoh's cosmic role to uphold Ma'at, the balance of all things. The temples employed thousands: gardeners, bakers, dancers, scribes, craftsmen, astronomers. Some cities, like Thebes, existed in service to temple life. These centers became economic and cultural engines. Land was donated by the state, cattle were raised on temple fields, and festivals like Opet drew crowds from across the land. Beyond the temples rose the obelisks, sharp spires of granite pointing skyward, etched with praises to the gods and the pharaoh. Obelisks were sunbeams in stone, aligned with celestial cycles. Carving them from single granite blocks, transporting them hundreds of miles, and raising them vertically required staggering engineering and divine favor. Their sheer presence was a declaration: here stands the divine king, stable and eternal as the stars. And then, the colossal statues. Pharaohs like Ramses II ordered statues of themselves larger than temples. These were not monuments to vanity alone. They were magical guardians, embodiments of royal power, placed at temple gates or on throne pedestals. Even in stone, the pharaoh was meant to see, hear, and protect. Many had inscribed ears on their bases, allowing the people to whisper prayers directly to their king's divine aspect. Architecture extended into the landscape. Sacred lakes mirrored the heavens. Temples aligned with solstices. The entire country was a ritual space with borders defined not just by geography but by mythology. From the Delta to Nubia, the land was mapped in gods and stories. For the pharaoh, commissioning a monument was not about personal glory. It was about sustaining the world. The act of building reaffirmed order. It kept chaos, Isfet, at bay. Every stone placed was a metaphysical anchor in the sea of time. And the workers? Not slaves, as once popularized, but skilled laborers, many of them state employees. They were housed, fed, and respected. In places like Deir el-Medina, their homes reveal surprisingly comfortable lives. They carved their own tombs, prayed to their own gods, and passed their knowledge from father to son. Their work was not just craft, it was sacred duty. These workers knew the myths by heart. They carved the trials of Osiris, the journeys of Ra, and the triumphs of Horus into stone. They weren't just copying symbols, they were activating them. In Egyptian belief, to write a word or image was to bring it into being. Thus, architecture was both scripture and spell. The building process itself was ritualized. Foundation. Ceremonies included the sacrifice of animals, the burying of sacred objects, and the marking of ground using astronomical alignments. Each corner of a temple was laid with cosmic precision, echoing the 4 cardinal points, anchoring the structure. In both time and space, the decorations evolved with time. Under Akhenaten, solar symbolism dominated. At Dendera, astronomical ceilings mapped the heavens in detail. At Edfu, reliefs recounted divine wars and cosmic victories. Each site added a verse to Egypt's eternal hymn. Pilgrims and locals alike engaged with these spaces. During festivals, processions wound through streets and courtyards, carrying statues of the gods on sacred boats. Citizens sang, danced, offered prayers. The temple was no cold monument. It was alive, inhabited by gods and energized by community, and when the pharaoh died, his monuments continued to sing. Every temple bore his cartouche, every wall his deeds. These were not just memorials. They were spiritual batteries, recharging his soul through the prayers and rituals performed daily. Even millennia later, these structures maintain a pulse. Modern visitors feel awe not just at scale, but at presence. The symbols, though weathered, still speak. The hieroglyphs, though ancient, still chant. They remind us that in ancient Egypt, architecture was not passive. It was active, divine, and alive. It built not just empires, but eternity. To the outside world, the pharaoh appeared invincible, the living embodiment of Horus, protected by divine law, crowned by the gods themselves. But behind the grandeur of monuments and rituals lay a harsher truth. Egypt was not isolated. Its borders were not impenetrable. And though the pharaoh ruled as a god, he could bleed like any man. Ancient Egypt, at the height of its power, was a geopolitical powerhouse. From the Libyan deserts in the west to the Levantine coasts in the east, from the Mediterranean in the north to the cataracts of Nubia in the south, Egypt's sphere of influence was vast, and its challenges equally so. Threats came in many forms. Nomadic raiders attacked from the deserts. Sea peoples descended in waves, burning towns along the delta. Rival kingdoms, like the Hittites and Mitanni, challenged Egypt's dominance in trade and territory. And in the south, the kingdom of Kush watched, waited, and occasionally struck. Pharaohs were expected not only to pray, but to conquer. They were warrior kings, commanders-in-chief of divine armies. Victory on the battlefield was not merely strategic, it was spiritual. Defeating enemies meant defeating chaos itself. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramses II became legendary for their military campaigns. Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, led at least 17 military expeditions into Canaan and Syria. He created a buffer zone of vassal states that sent tribute in gold, cattle, and warriors. At Megiddo, he launched a surprise attack through a narrow mountain pass, a move so daring his generals hesitated. But his boldness led to total victory. After the battle, he paraded enemy princes before Amun's altar, reaffirming that his strength came not from brute force alone, but from divine guidance. Then came Ramses II and the epic Battle of Kadesh. It was one of the largest chariot battles in history, over 5,000 chariots clashing in a chaotic storm of dust and death. Ramses was nearly killed in an ambush, but rallied his troops with divine fury. He later declared it a great victory, though in truth the battle ended in a stalemate. Still, he immortalized it in temple reliefs across Egypt, showing himself as a one-man army, slaying foes by the dozens, while his horse galloped through enemy lines. These depictions were propaganda, yes, but they were also spiritual affirmations. The king's body was the battlefield, his arms the weapons of the gods, and when war wasn't the answer, diplomacy was. Pharaohs sent letters to kings across the known world, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the time. These tablets, known as the Amarna letters, reveal a world of formal courtesies, backdoor politics, and marriage proposals. Egypt's daughters were offered as queens to foreign kings, and in return caravans of gold and exotic animals arrived at Thebes. Foreign wives brought foreign gods, languages and fashions into the court. Some, like Gilukepa of Mitanni, arrived with entire entourages. These women were both brides and ambassadors, binding kingdoms in fragile unity. Trade was another battlefield. Egyptian ships ventured down the Red Sea, up the Levantine coast, and into the Mediterranean. From Nubia came gold, from Byblos, cedar, from Punt, incense and myrrh. Each good was a thread in a vast web of political and economic influence. Even in peace, power had to be projected. Obelisks were gifted. Sculptures of pharaohs were installed in foreign lands. Embassies doubled as temples. Every diplomatic gesture was laced with divinity. But foreign affairs also meant vulnerability. Corruption, rebellion, and espionage were constant risks. Vassal kings sometimes turned on Egypt. Local governors might embezzle or conspire. Intelligence networks became vital. Spies, often merchants or scribes, reported back to the pharaoh's inner circle. Egypt's enemies were not always foreign. Internal uprisings, rival claimants to the throne, and ambitious generals could be just as deadly. The balance between religious legitimacy and military strength was delicate. Lose one, and the pharaoh's image and power could crumble. In later periods, as Egypt's influence waned, new enemies emerged. Assyrians, Persians, and eventually the Greeks under Alexander the Great turned Egypt into a prize to be won. Yet even conquerors often adopted Egyptian customs, crowned themselves in pharaonic style, and respected the temples. Egypt's spiritual and cultural power endured even when its political autonomy faltered. Some pharaohs were peacemakers as much as warriors. Amenhotep III presided over a time of relative stability, focusing on building projects and cultural flourishing rather than military conquest. His reign is remembered for opulence, diplomacy, and international marriages that kept enemies at bay. Others ruled in more volatile times. Akhenaten, in his religious revolution, may have neglected Egypt's military frontier, allowing incursions and unrest. His radical monotheism disrupted the diplomatic status quo. After his death, his successors worked quickly to restore Egypt's former glory and its alliances. Pharaohs needed more than swords and scribes. They needed narrative. They shaped history with stone, depicting themselves trampling enemies, receiving tribute, and offering peace with divine poise. Victory was etched not only in battlefields, but in temple walls, statues, and obelisks, narratives carved for eternity. These symbols of power were not only domestic. Foreign emissaries visiting Thebes or Memphis would pass through monumental gates adorned with these stories. They would see the king towering in stone, eternal, invincible. Egypt's architecture spoke louder than any ambassador. The duality, of the pharaoh, as both destroyer of enemies and granter of peace, was central to his image. His hand could offer grain or crush skulls. His voice could summon armies or invite envoys, and the people believed. When the pharaoh triumphed abroad, the entire nation shared in his glory. Festivals were held, statues were raised, songs composed. The enemy's defeat was Egypt's cosmic victory. It wasn't just about borders. It was about balance, Ma'at over Isfet, order over chaos. Thus, foreign affairs in ancient Egypt were not mere politics. They were sacred performance. Every treaty, every battle, every marriage alliance was part of a cosmic script. And at the center stood the pharaoh, conductor of war and peace, guardian of Egypt's soul, the eternal negotiator between heaven and earth. In ancient Egypt, myth was not metaphor. It was a living framework, a sacred script through which the world was understood and shaped. Gods walked among men, not as distant deities, but as immediate presences. And at the center of it all stood the pharaoh, not merely as ruler, but as divine actor in an eternal cosmic drama. From birth, the pharaoh was more than mortal. His conception was often linked to divine intervention. Temple reliefs show gods like Amun-Ra visiting the queen, in disguise bestowing her with a child destined to rule. This wasn't mythology for entertainment. It was state doctrine. A pharaoh was not elected, not chosen by people, but by the gods. He was the living Horus, falcon-headed god of the sky and kingship. Upon death he became Osiris, lord of the eye, underworld. This cycle of rebirth mirrored the daily journey of the sun across the sky, descending into night only to rise again. Just as the sun god Ra sailed his solar bark through the 12 hours of darkness, defeating chaos, so too did the pharaoh fight unseen battles to ensure the world continued. To the Egyptians, this divine cycle wasn't symbolic. It was essential. The pharaoh's actions in the temples, his words during rituals, his very breath during ceremonies, all sustained the fabric of existence. Each morning, priests would reenact the slaying of Apophis, the serpent of chaos who threatened Ra's solar journey. But these rituals only worked because the pharaoh authorized them, stood as their guarantor. Without the pharaoh, the rituals were powerless. Without the rituals, the sun might not rise. Myths shaped every aspect of rule. The crown itself was symbolic. The white crown of Upper Egypt, the red of Lower Egypt, combined into the double crown signifying unity and divine order. The crook and flail, held in crossed arms on statues of Osiris and echoed in images of the pharaoh, symbolized kingship and divine justice. The pharaoh's relationship with the gods was not distant, it was intimate. In daily temple rituals he, alone or his appointed high priest, could enter the holiest shrines. There he would wash, dress, and feed the statue of the god, not as a servant, but as a son honoring his divine parent. These acts were considered nourishment for the gods, maintaining their power and favor. Temples were not only administrative centers, they were the homes of gods, and the pharaoh was their steward, just as Horus avenged his father Osiris and restored order to Egypt. Each pharaoh saw himself as restorer of Ma'at, the divine balance of truth, justice, and harmony. Myth was history, and history was sacred. Tales of the gods' struggles, Isis reassembling Osiris's body, Set's betrayal, the birth of Horus, were not just bedtime stories. They were reflected in political action, in festivals, in coronation rites. The annual reenactment of Horus's triumph legitimized each new ruler. The said festival, held after 30 years of reign, revived the pharaoh's power through ritual death and rebirth, echoing Osiris and Ra alike. But mythology wasn't static. It adapted with time. New gods rose in prominence, old ones were merged, or transformed. Amun became Amun-Ra. Ptah of Memphis gained prominence under different dynasties. Akhenaten famously attempted to replace the entire pantheon with a single sun disk, Aten, proclaiming himself the sole intermediary. This radical shift reveals how entwined myth and power were. Akhenaten wasn't just changing theology, he was asserting absolute control. If only he could speak to a 10, then only he had divine authority. His city, Akhenaten, modern Amarna, was built as a new center of mythic truth, away from the temples of Thebes. After his death, traditional religion returned with a vengeance. Images of Aten were defaced. The old gods were restored. Tutankhamun, his likely son, was renamed to honor Amun. Myth was resilient because it was deeply embedded in the psyche of the people. Divine legitimacy mattered at every level. If famine struck, if the Nile failed to flood, the people might question the pharaoh's alignment with the gods. Was he truly Horus? Was Maat being upheld? To counter doubt, public displays of piety were essential. Processions, offerings, the building of temples and statues, these were not merely expressions of faith, but tools of power. To see the pharaoh kneeling before Amun or Ra was to see the divine order reaffirmed. Even humility was a performance of strength. Myths also served as moral instruction. They outlined the qualities of a just ruler, wise like Thoth, strong like Horus, protective like Bastet, enduring like Geb. The pharaoh embodied these traits not only to govern, but to teach. And what of the gods themselves? They were many, sometimes contradictory, often overlapping. Ra, the sun god, ruled the sky by day. Osiris reigned over the dead. Isis was the mother, magician, protector. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, recorded the weight of souls. Set, god of chaos and desert. Storms was both necessary and feared. Together they formed a dynamic equilibrium, and the pharaoh stood as their axis. The divine role of the king extended even to his name. Upon coronation, the pharaoh received 5 royal names, each one a declaration of his connection to heaven. These were inscribed on temples, monuments, and scrolls, eternal signatures on the canvas of time. In the people's eyes, the pharaoh's face was the face of the divine. His words carried supernatural weight. A decree was more than law. It was an echo of Ma'at, and even in death, his role did not end. Through careful mummification, through spells inscribed on tomb walls, through offerings and invocations, the pharaoh transformed into Osiris. He joined the gods, became one with the stars, and continued his work, protecting Egypt from beyond. So deeply was myth ingrained that even foreign rulers, after conquering Egypt, adopted its framework. Alexander the Great was declared son of Amun at Siwa. Roman emperors built temples in Egyptian style. Myth outlived dynasty, language, and empire. Because in Egypt, myth was not myth. It was the air they breathed, the sky they painted, the foundation beneath every stone. And the pharaoh, he was not simply part of the story. He was the one who made sure it was never forgotten. The grandeur of the pharaoh was dazzling. Golden crowns, alabaster palaces, processions of priests and dancers, chants that echoed through temple halls. But behind the mask of divinity, behind the heavy weight of the crown, a quieter story unfolded. It is the tale of isolation, pressure, fear, and in some cases, madness. To be a pharaoh was to live a paradox, the most powerful man in the land, yet utterly alone. From the moment he ascended the throne, the pharaoh ceased to be a person. He became a god, and gods cannot show weakness. He was watched constantly by priests, courtiers, guards, scribes. Every gesture, every word, every moment of his life was symbolic. He was the heartbeat of Egypt. If he stumbled, the cosmic order itself might unravel. This divine burden created a palace of mirrors where the pharaoh could see no one clearly, not even himself. He lived surrounded by ceremony. His meals were rituals. His bath was sanctified. His words became law. Yet how could he trust anyone? Could he be certain of loyalty from courtiers who smiled in daylight and schemed in shadow? Could he confide in servants trained to bow and say nothing? The court was a jungle of whispers. Brothers, cousins, generals, priests, all potential allies, all potential threats. Consider the young Tutankhamun, crowned as a boy, surrounded by powerful regents, likely manipulated at every step. His tomb suggests a hurried, perhaps suspicious burial. Was he loved, protected, or a pawn in palace intrigues? Or Akhenaten, visionary, or lunatic. He withdrew from the capital, rejected the gods of his ancestors, and surrounded himself with images of the sun. He changed art, worship, and diplomacy. But in the process, he isolated Egypt, alienated priests, and erased centuries of tradition. Was it divine inspiration or descent into obsession? Isolation had layers. Even the pharaoh's family could not offer normal companionship. Queens were political allies. Sons were heirs or rivals. Daughters might be married off to secure treaties. Every relationship was entangled in power. In private chambers, anxiety grew. Messages arrived hourly. Dreams were interpreted by court magicians. Omens read in the stars or in the guts of sacrificed animals. If a falcon cried at the wrong moment, or a priest stumbled during a ritual, fear took hold. Was it a sign of the gods' displeasure? Was an uprising near? Was a trusted advisor plotting poison? Many pharaohs slept in heavily guarded rooms. Their food tasted, their wine poured only from sealed jars. Some changed servants frequently or forbade anyone from touching them directly. The threat of assassination was real. Power and paranoia grew together. Inscriptions and texts reveal a world of omens, dreams, and divine messages. Pharaohs consulted oracles, sought visions, and wore protective amulets. Their beds were inscribed with prayers, their sandals carved with protective spells. The very air they breathed was watched, measured, interpreted. Yet madness wasn't always fear. Sometimes it was ego unbound. Ramses II built more statues of himself than any pharaoh before or after. Entire temples bore his image larger than life, often dwarfing the gods. Was this devotion or delusion? He ruled for over 60 years. Did he begin to believe he truly was immortal? Later pharaohs mirrored this divine obsession. Some issued decrees that they could not be contradicted. Others had enemies erased from records, names chiseled out, faces scratched from reliefs, as if to delete their existence. The line between sacred rule and tyranny was thin. Palace intrigue was constant. Harem conspiracies, poisonings, coups. The stories are many, though often veiled in silence. The infamous harem conspiracy against Ramses III involved royal wives, high officials, and military officers. They planned to kill him and place another son on the throne. The plan failed, but not before shaking the foundations of royal trust. In the court, every ally could become an enemy. Every gift might hide a blade. Even in death, pharaohs feared betrayal. Their tombs were booby-trapped, cursed, and hidden. Some were buried in secrecy. Priests sometimes moved royal mummies to safer locations, away from grave robbers or ambitious successors. All this points to a truth rarely spoken in the shadow of pyramids, that absolute power does not bring peace. It isolates, it haunts. Pharaohs were gods, but gods in human form suffer. They bore the pressure of heaven, the needs of a vast empire, the expectations of the people, and the judgment of history. Few could carry this weight without cracks forming. In their eyes, we see the cost. Carved into temple walls, they stare ahead, serene, eternal. But behind the stone, perhaps, a flicker of doubt remains. A question, who can the god-king trust? The pharaoh's court became a crucible of performance. Each interaction required calculation. A smile could be mistaken for plotting, a silence for disapproval. He had to remain dignified, composed, and unwavering. Yet beneath that still surface, his mind might whirl in endless paranoia. The arts, often a source of beauty and comfort, were not immune to the king's inner torment. Artists were instructed to show the pharaoh without blemish, forever youthful and divine. This demand for perfection erased the human beneath. Some kings even altered the style of their own images. Larger eyes, broader hips, elongated skulls, perhaps reflecting distorted self-perceptions or attempts to seem more godlike. And then there were the omens of dreams. Pharaohs kept dream interpreters at their side. A snake in a dream might mean betrayal, a river overflowing, prosperity, a lion, rebellion. Some kings refused to leave their chambers after an ill omen. Others delayed campaigns or executions because of a priest's warning. This blend of mysticism and governance could spiral. When every cloud carried a message, when every servant's glance might be a signal, reality itself began to fracture. In some cases, pharaohs broke from custom altogether. They abandoned palaces, retreated into remote sanctuaries, or built new capitals far from the heart of power. These acts, cloaked in vision, often reeked of desperation. As Egypt's power declined in later dynasties, the throne passed between generals, priests, and foreign conquerors. Each wore the crown, performed the rituals, and proclaimed divine right. But few had the aura of the early god-kings. The magic had faded. What remained was the heavy burden and the growing madness that accompanied it. So when we gaze at their monuments, we must remember, the stones may be silent, but the minds behind them were not. They heard voices, divine, political, paranoid. And in those voices, the dark side of power whispered endlessly. A crown, after all, is a circle, and a circle, once entered, has no end. The story of ancient Egypt did not end with the fall of the last pharaoh. In many ways, it began again, in fragments of stone, in forgotten tombs, in hieroglyphs half buried beneath centuries of silence. Egypt did not vanish. It waited, patient, beneath the sand. The legacy of the pharaohs is not just measured in monuments, but in memory, in the enduring fascination they hold over the modern world. When the last native pharaoh fell and the empire passed into the hands of Persians, Greeks, and Romans, the rituals continued for a time. The gods were honored, temples remained active. But slowly, the thread frayed. With the rise of Christianity, temples were closed, idols defaced, papyrus scrolls burned, hieroglyphs became illegible, the language of the gods lost to time, and yet the pyramids remained. The colossi stood. The Nile still flowed past ruins that whispered of greatness. Travelers marveled, priests guarded secrets, and legends grew. In medieval times, Egypt was seen through the lens of myth. Arab chroniclers wrote of hidden chambers, magical inscriptions, and treasures guarded by curses. Pharaohs became sorcerers. In stories, their tombs gateways to other worlds. But the great rediscovery began in earnest with Napoleon's campaign in Egypt at the turn of the 19th century. Alongside soldiers came scholars, artists, linguists, engineers, who documented the ruins in meticulous detail. Their work, compiled in the monumental Description de l'Egypte, brought the ancient world back into European consciousness. Then came the key, the Rosetta Stone. Discovered in 1799, it bore the same text in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Scholars realized it was a code, and in 1822, Jean-François Champollion cracked it, unlocking the language of the pharaohs after nearly 1,500 years of silence. Suddenly the past spoke. Walls once mute now told stories of gods and battles, love, poems, and tax records. Tombs revealed not just bones, but beliefs. Names long erased from history returned, crowned anew in academic halls. And then, in 1922, a young king emerged from darkness. Tutankhamun. Howard Carter's discovery of his nearly intact tomb sent shockwaves around the world. Gold glinted beneath centuries of dust. Masks, chariots, furniture, all perfectly preserved. It was not just a tomb, it was a time capsule. The legend of the boy king revived global Egyptomania. Newspapers ran daily stories. Museums scrambled to host artifacts. Even Hollywood embraced the mystique, birthing a new genre of mummy films and exotic fantasies. But beyond the gold, something deeper stirred. People felt a connection to this ancient world, not just admiration, but recognition. The longing for eternity, the fear of death, the search for meaning in stars and stones. Egypt, it seemed, had never truly died. It lived within us. Excavations continued. The Valley of the Kings revealed more secrets. At Saqqara, new tombs emerged, each decade. In the sands of Amarna, Akhenaten's strange city came to light. Luxor's temple walls, cleaned and restored, revealed vibrant pigments beneath millennia of grime. Archaeology evolved from treasure hunting to storytelling. Each artifact became a voice. Each inscription, a thread in the grand tapestry. Modern. Egyptologists blend science and sensitivity. CT scans peer into mummies without unwrapping them. Satellite imagery maps hidden chambers. DNA analysis traces royal lineages. The dead speak, not in ghosts, but in data, and yet wonder remains. Visitors to Karnak, or Abu Simbel, still gasp at the scale, the silence, the sunlit columns carved with stars. Children trace hieroglyphs with wide eyes. Elders stand quietly, hands pressed to stone older than scripture. The legacy is not in relics alone. It is in imagination. Egypt inspired Freemasons, alchemists, poets, and painters. Its motifs appear in architecture from Paris to Washington. Its gods echo in comic, books, and video games. Cleopatra's name stirs passion. The pyramids anchor conspiracy theories and spiritual quests alike. But why does Egypt endure? Perhaps because it dreamed big, bigger than kings. It built for eternity. It wrote on granite. It sculpted with the stars in mind. And its philosophy, Ma'at, the balance of all things, resonates even now. In a world of chaos, Egypt offers a model of order. In a time of mortality, it offers glimpses of forever. Rediscovery is ongoing. Each generation finds new meaning. Each tomb reopened. Each glyph deciphered adds to the chorus. In this way, the pharaohs achieve what few mortals can. They are remembered. They are studied. They are whispered to through glass in museum halls. Theirs is a legacy not only of power, but of mystery. Not only of conquest, but of questions. Who were they truly? What did they feel in their most private moments? Did they wonder, as we do, if their stories would survive? They did. And we are their readers, their seekers, their latest priests. Every relic we uncover, every story we translate, is a torch passed from their world to ours. We preserve their dreams. In documentaries, in classrooms, in digital archives. Pharaohs like Ramses, Hatshepsut, and Akhenaten, once veiled in myth, now live in high-resolution scans and academic debates. Their stories have been carved into silicon as surely as they were once chiseled into limestone. In museums, children press their faces to glass, staring at scarabs and crowns. In libraries, scholars parse symbols long buried. On YouTube and in classrooms, new generations meet these ancient figures anew, not as distant relics, but as part of a shared human lineage. And the sands are not done speaking. New discoveries continue to reshape what we know. An uncovered tomb, a hidden shaft, a lost papyrus. Each revelation reminds us that the story is far from over. Egypt, like the Nile, is timeless. The pharaohs ruled with awe, they died with ritual, and they rise again, not in body, but in memory. Their legacy is not just what they built, but what they dared to imagine, that their names might echo across millennia. And in this, they succeeded. For all the grandeur of ancient Egypt, for all the statues unearthed and tombs illuminated, for all the scrolls translated and artifacts displayed, there is still so much we do not know. Egypt's mysteries are not confined to lost treasures or undeciphered texts. They reside in questions of motive, belief, and purpose. They whisper through stone and silence. Some of these mysteries have fascinated generations. Others are newer, uncovered by science but not yet understood. All remind us that Egypt's story, though ancient, is far from finished. Let us begin where the world often begins, the pyramids. We know their location. We know their scale. We have measured their blocks, traced their shafts, mapped their alignment with stars. And yet, how exactly were they built? Not the labor or logistics, though that too remains debated, but the why. Why such immense effort? Why such precise alignments with constellations and solstices? Were the pyramids merely tombs or cosmic machines, architectural prayers meant to lift the pharaoh's soul to the heavens? The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal points. Its internal shafts point toward specific stars significant in ancient cosmology. The measurements of its base correspond with astonishing accuracy to the curvature of the Earth. Did ancient architects possess lost knowledge of astronomy or mathematics? Or was it intuition refined over generations? Another enduring enigma is the Sphinx. Carved from a single block of limestone, it stands as a silent sentinel on the Giza plateau. Who built it? Most agree it was during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, but not all scholars concur. Some propose it is far older, eroded not just by wind but by millennia of rain, implying a date before Egypt's unification. And what of its face? Some argue the features do not match known images of Khafre. Could it represent a different king? Or even a divine being? Might it have once worn a ceremonial beard and headdress now lost to time? These questions lead into deeper waters. The origins of Egyptian civilization remain hazy. From where did the earliest settlers come? How did agriculture flourish so suddenly along the Nile? Was there a predecessor culture, now vanished, that laid the groundwork? Some theorists propose connections to other ancient civilizations. Mesopotamia, Nubia, even distant cultures in the Indus Valley or Mesoamerica. Most mainstream scholars reject the more extreme versions of these ideas, but they acknowledge cultural exchange and influence, the movement of ideas across deserts and seas. Still others turn to more controversial ground. Pseudo-scientific theories abound, and of aliens, of Atlantis, of forgotten super-civilizations. These capture the public imagination, but distract from the real and more intriguing truth that ancient humans, with limited tools and vast imagination, achieved extraordinary feats. Another mystery lies in Akhenaten's revolution. Why did this Pharaoh abandon the traditional gods and build a city for the Aten, the sun disk? Was it a religious vision, political maneuver, or both? And why did his successors erase his name, abandon his temples, and restore the old order so swiftly? Even more puzzling, was Akhenaten the father of Tutankhamun? DNA suggests a connection, but inscriptions are strangely silent. Why was Tutankhamun's tomb so hastily prepared? Was his death sudden or suspicious? The question of succession haunts many dynasties. Gaps in king lists, co-regencies, rulers whose monuments were defaced. Female pharaohs like Hatshepsut, whose memory was nearly erased. Was it jealousy, politics, or something more? And what of the so-called Sea Peoples, who helped collapse the new kingdom? They appear in battle scenes, described as mysterious invaders from the north. But who were they? Raiders from the Aegean? Refugees from climate catastrophe? Their true identity remains unknown, their impact undeniable. Then there are the tombs not yet found. Where is the final resting place of Imhotep, the architect of the first pyramid? Of Cleopatra and Mark Antony? Of many unnamed nobles and priests whose stories remain buried? Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, and satellite imaging offer hope, but the sands are vast, and Egypt keeps its secrets well. The mummification process itself holds mysteries. How did embalmers develop such precision? How were certain resins obtained from distant lands? Why were some mummies lavishly prepared, others crudely wrapped? Recent CT scans show anomalies, surgical implants, unknown materials, unexplained damage. Were these errors, experiments, or something else? Even the Book of the Dead, that most famous funerary text, exists in hundreds of versions. No two are identical. Was each personalized? Or is there a deeper code, a set of instructions we've only begun to decode? There are also curious artifacts whose purposes elude us. The so-called Dendera light reliefs, showing what appears to be a bulb-like object held by priests. Was this merely symbolic or something misunderstood? Or the Baghdad battery, often debated, which some believe to be an ancient form of galvanic cell. While found in Mesopotamia, such out-of-place artifacts raise questions about what Egyptians may have understood or encountered. And what of music and sound? Instruments have been found, but we do not know what ancient Egyptian music sounded like. Did they have scales similar to ours? What songs accompanied funerals, festivals, or farming? The melodies of ancient life remain unplayed. Even in language, mysteries persist. We can read hieroglyphs, yes, but how were they pronounced? What did the cadence of a priest's chant sound like inside a darkened temple, incense swirling through columns? And then there is the greatest mystery of all, the mind of the Egyptian. What did it feel like to believe in Ma'at, not just as law, but as a cosmic force, to see the world as a balance of chaos and harmony, to live each day as a sacred reenactment of divine order? This is the hardest knowledge to recover. We can study tools and temples, we can analyze texts, but to step into the worldview of an ancient priest, farmer, or queen, that requires imagination and humility. Perhaps the truest legacy of Egypt's mysteries is this: they teach us to wonder, to ask, to dig, to doubt, to admit what we don't know, and to accept that some questions are not meant to be answered easily. For in every corridor not yet excavated, in every glyph not yet translated, there lives the thrill of discovery. Egypt, ever ancient, ever new. Its riddles are not shortcomings. They are the soul of the story, and perhaps that is what the pharaohs intended all along, that we, centuries later, would still be searching for their truth, still listening, still looking, still dreaming beneath the stars. What remains when the stones erode, when the names fade, when the sand swallows even the most grandiose of monuments? What does ancient Egypt truly leave behind, not just in relics, but in reflections? The answer is both simple and profound. Lessons. Lessons etched into history, hidden beneath the weight of time, and still echoing in the quiet corners of the modern world. Not just about empires or temples, but about humanity itself. Egypt, more than any other ancient civilization, fused mystery with meaning, and from that fusion, we can draw insights that outlast any dynasty. Every pharaoh, every builder, every priest understood one truth: they were part of a continuum. Their names, deeds, and monuments were not only for the present, they were for eternity. The drive to be remembered shaped every decision, and though some tried to erase others, memory endured. We, too, live in pursuit of legacy, in family, in work, in words. Egypt reminds us that legacy is not always grandeur. Sometimes it is the effort to bring order, to honor life, to leave something meaningful behind. Pharaohs sought to conquer death through tombs, mummification, ritual, and memory. Yet even the most carefully preserved kings fell to time. Mummies decayed, pyramids cracked, names were forgotten or misread. The lesson is not that immortality is impossible, but that true eternity lies not in body, but in impact, in the questions we provoke, in the curiosity we ignite, in the values we uphold. Central to Egyptian belief was Ma'at, the principle of balance, truth, and cosmic harmony. It governed not only the stars and seasons, but ethics, law, and daily life. To stray from Ma'at was to invite chaos. In a world increasingly fragmented, this principle feels more relevant than ever. Balance in our relationships, balance in our ambitions, balance between progress and preservation. Ma'at is not just an ancient deity, it is a mirror. Egypt never tried to answer everything. It reveled in the unknown. Gods could wear many faces. Death had many stages. Dreams were divine messages. Questions were invitations. Today, we rush for answers. We fear ambiguity. But Egypt teaches patience, wonder, that some truths are best approached slowly, reverently. That mystery itself is a form of wisdom. The pharaoh was divine, yet still mortal. Thrones were usurped, palaces burned. Even the god-kings died. Power, no matter how absolute, was never permanent. This humbles us, reminds us that leadership must serve something greater. That titles fade, but integrity lasts, that the mightiest crown rests on human shoulders. Egyptian art was more than decoration. It was belief made visible. From the curve of a hieroglyph to the colors of a tomb, every choice reflected reverence. Even in funerary masks, the dead were adorned with dignity. This invites us to reconsider how we design, how we build, how we honor the sacred in daily life. Beauty, Egypt tells us, is not luxury. It is devotion. They feared oblivion. They hoped for rebirth. They mourned, dreamed, loved, and doubted, just as we do. Across 4,000 years, the human soul remains consistent. We want meaning. We seek connection. We wrestle with time. Egypt's rituals may be unfamiliar, but their emotional roots are universal. From early archaeologists to modern Egyptologists, the story of rediscovery is also one of responsibility. The past can be lost through neglect, greed, or ignorance. And once lost, it is hard to reclaim. Preserving culture, memory, and wisdom is not passive. It is a choice, a duty. Egypt reminds us that what we value must be protected, or it will vanish. We marvel at kings, but the builders, the farmers, the scribes, their lives were no less profound. A broken pot, a laundry list, a child's toy, these fragments speak louder than gold. In our own lives, too, the everyday holds beauty. Meaning does not always wear a crown. Above all, Egypt dares us to imagine, to look at a horizon and see possibility, to ask big questions, to build as if it mattered forever. Its temples whisper, create. Its gods beckon, wonder. Its tombs murmur, remember. And in those whispers, we hear something timeless, that life, fleeting as it is, can still reach eternity. Ancient Egyptians did not just record time, they sanctified it. Each day was a miniature reenactment of cosmic cycles, the sun rising as Ra, descending into the underworld, and rising again reborn. Festivals aligned with the flooding of the Nile, signaling rebirth and abundance. We live rushed, fragmented lives. Egypt invites us to mark time more intentionally, to slow down, to honor rhythms, to see time not just as currency, but as ceremony. The Eye, tales of gods battling chaos, of Osiris rising from death, of Isis searching for her beloved, these are not just myths. They are frameworks for meaning, comfort in grief, and maps for resilience. Even today, we tell stories to make sense of the world. Egypt's endurance reminds us that the best stories are the ones that carry soul. That stories, like pyramids, can outlast empires. For Egyptians, death was not the end. It was transition, a journey, a return. This belief gave structure to grief and hope to the suffering. We may frame it differently today, but the essence endures. We look for renewal, in nature and love and second chances. Egypt offers not just remembrance, but reassurance. Perhaps Egypt's greatest gift is not answers, but the invitation to keep asking, who am I? What do I leave behind? What is sacred? What does it mean to live well? Pharaohs rose and fell. Temples crumbled. But the questions remain, and in seeking them, we too become part of the story. So when we gaze at the Nile, when we walk through museum halls, when we read the carved names of long-dead kings, we do not just remember Egypt, we remember ourselves, not as rulers, not as builders, but as seekers, as dreamers, as voices still whispering beneath the stars.